Today on the Paul Street Journal, Brian and I will be discussing charitable giving. And charitable giving is something we've briefly talked about before. I'm sure our audience knows exactly what charitable giving is, but today we'll be discussing where it fits into Catholic social teaching on economics. And this video will be the short version of this. There's a long version of this, and Brian actually has a book for the long version. There's going to be a link for the book to purchase, a Barnes & Noble link in the description. This is what it looks like for those of you who are watching. But like we said, this will be a lot briefer. So Brian, what role does charitable giving play in Catholic social teaching?
Charitable giving is different than justice. It's different than philanthropy. The aim of a neoliberal might be justice. The aim of a secularist might be philanthropy. But charity is kenosis in action. That is, receiving the total gift of Jesus that he gives to us on the cross and in the sacraments, receiving that, and then being givers ourselves, turning ourselves into gifts for others. So it's a self-sacrificial, self-emptying kind of giving. If you read Catholic social teaching, Pope John Paul II especially will focus on the good of the free market. Think about solicitudo res socialis. Think about centesimus annus. Pope John Paul II is saying that the free market is good, but that it's very clumsy, that it has a lot of hard edges, sharp edges, and that it's charity. It's a society that's driven by the love of Jesus and the love of others that softens the hard edges of the free market economy and makes the world sustainable and beautiful and fun to live in.
So kenosis is something that we talked about in season 1, episode 3. The act of giving your entire self like Jesus does on the cross. And you're saying that charitable giving is a practical way of doing that, one practical way of doing that, and that it's our way to participate in the market. So what are some examples of how that's played out in the life of the church?
Well, let's go to the New Testament and learn from that biblical foundation, and then hear what the church has to say. So if you take a look at the first Jerusalem community in Acts chapter 4,
there was not a needy person among them, for as many as were possessors of lands or houses sold them and brought the proceeds of what was sold and laid it at the apostles' feet. And distribution was made to each as any had need.
Okay, so it's important to realize that this is very different than Old Testament giving. So in the Old Testament, the goal wasn't necessarily charity, it was justice, and justice is very good. It's a halfway point to charity. But in Old Testament law, you were not allowed to sell your land. The land was given to you by God himself, apportioned to the Israelite people through Joshua. So selling land was not something you did. You would give back to God and to others by tithing food that came from your land. So the sale of land says, okay, well, this New Testament economic model is totally different. We see that they're liquidating their assets and then basically selling out of the old world and buying into a brand new economy, theology, soteriology, all of this stuff, right? So big change. But there's a lot of dads listening to the Paul Street Journal. This isn't very practical. We don't have the ability necessarily to sell everything because we have families to take care of, households to manage, right? So we'll answer that when we talk about the Macedonians in 2 Corinthians. But if you look here, some people say this is communism. Is it? No, it's the first monastery. People are purposefully selling out of the old world or of the secular world. They're buying into a religious community. So this is what a monastery looks like. So it was a very tight-knit economic community. So let's now think about what St. Paul is doing with the Macedonians and with the Corinthians. So St. Paul is trying to encourage the Corinthians to be like the Macedonians here, because the Corinthians are not very well behaved and the Macedonians were very generous. So in regards to giving, the Macedonians, St. Paul says, gave according to their means and even beyond their means. And did they give because they wanted to or because they had to according to some law? They gave according to their own free will, not under the compulsion of any law, right? So this is the spirit of kenosis in the New Testament. The Macedonians weren't giving because they had to, according to law, but because they wanted to. They were motivated to. The law of the Old Testament, which was written on stone, all of a sudden is now written on their hearts, and they desire to do the right thing. So that's kenosis. And notice how they're not selling out. They're not selling their lands and properties, putting it at the feet of the apostles. They're living within their means. They're giving generously. They're even stretching themselves a little bit. So this serves as a model for dads, like Catholic dads, to follow. So with that in mind, let's see what the church actually has to say about giving. Do we have to tithe? Do we have to give a certain percentage of our income? What is the church asking for? So let's start with the Catechism of the Catholic Church. This is disappointingly simple, but we'll understand why soon.
So the Catechism of the Catholic Church says, the faithful are obliged to assist with the material needs of the church, each according to his own ability.
Okay, so
Rather simple.
very simple. Notice how there's no percentage provided here. It's just important to know that it should be a conscious thing. It should be something that's considered, and it's an obligation even. This is one of the 5 precepts of the church. So to be an active practicing Catholic, you have to be doing this, but it's very open and broad. And notice how there's no laws of compulsion other than to think about it and do it.
Yeah.
All right. What does the Code of Canon Law have to say?
So the Code of Canon Law says, the Christian faithful are obliged to assist with the needs of the church so that the church has what is necessary for divine worship, for apostolic works and works of charity, and for the decent sustenance of ministers.
This comes right from Scripture, right? This is exactly what the first Christians were doing. They were supporting the church for worship, for evangelization, and for charity.
Right. Yeah, I think what shines through in the biblical examples and in what is prescribed in the Catechism and the Code of Canon Law is a sense of solidarity. I think that there's, especially in the biblical examples, giving of what's yours for the other. There's like a sense of community, and that's what drives the desire to give, the sense of solidarity.
Let's share the infographic that comes from the Paul Street Journal webpage, which is on InsideTheWalls.org, the St. Paul Inside the Walls website. In regards to New Testament principles, there's basically a methodology to follow that comes straight from Scripture. So the first thing to do is to dedicate your finances to God. That is either literally or spiritually. If you're in a monastic experience, it's literally and figuratively, right?
Yeah.
But if you're a dad and you have a family to take care of, you still have to dedicate spiritually all of your resources to God. The only reason you have them is because you exist, and you only exist because God created you,
Right.
as well as all the things that you have. So there needs to be an understanding that everything that's yours is God's. Just like on the cross, everything that was God's became yours. All right? And the second thing to do is to focus on the immediate needs of your family. Not just your immediate nuclear family, but your extended family. This is a New Testament principle, and we talked about this in Season 1, Episode 3. The Christian who does not take care of his own family is worse than a non-believer. So family. But have you ever been a part of or experienced a family who only cares about their family? Like, that's no good. It's like old water. It'll kill you eventually. So there needs to be this shift of focus from the immediate needs of the family to, it's got to expand outward. There needs to be a desire for families to help other families, even people that they don't know, even people in other countries. In that regard, we need to start thinking about the good of the church for worship, evangelization, and ministers. That's straight from the Code of Canon Law, right? For charitable works. So this is planned giving. This is something that we're doing on a week-by-week basis when we put that money in the basket. It's not, oh, what's the spare change in my wallet? No, it's a conscious decision, and we're giving according to our means, maybe even a little beyond our means, right? And then finally, we want to make sure that our giving isn't totally planned all the time. If you come across a person on the street who is hungry and you sit and you say, I'll pray for you, be well, right? That is not a believer, right? I'm quoting James. Impromptu works to the poor are important. If you're busy and you come across somebody, or it is still critical that you address their need as much as you can.
Right.
And if you live in New York City, I realize you see hundreds of these people a day.
Yeah.
I realize the challenge. So do your best.
Right. Yeah. And I think it's important to note that one of these doesn't cancel out the other. It's a flow from the top to the bottom.
Right.
Everything is dedicated to God, and fulfilling the needs of your family, like you said, still must go beyond that to the poor and to the church. And just because you do one doesn't mean you shouldn't or can't do the other.
Sure. And taxes help the poor, for example. So does that mean that by paying taxes, you help the poor?
Yeah, but you should still.
I will guarantee that the tax dollars you're paying aren't fulfilling all the needs of the poor.
Right.
So, and I know you don't get to choose which taxes you pay, but it's important to recognize the needs outside of government assistance and to fill those needs as well. So from an application perspective, how should Christians be thinking, men and women? Identify what value you can bring to the church, to the poor, to your family. Just as an example, when it comes to the church, let's say you own a small business as a landscaper. You're not making a ton of money, and the most you could offer is, let's say, $20 in cash in the basket during the offertory every week. What's better, that or thinking to yourself, well, what's my value? If you have a landscaping service, and let's say you have 25 clients, if you just chose to have one client, your parish, as the client that you're going to donate your services for, what's more valuable to the church? The $20 in the basket per week, how much is that total?
$80 a month.
Let's say the cost of landscaping for the church is $2,000 a month. And if those services were donated, what's more valuable?
The services.
The services by a long shot,
Yeah.
by a long shot. So the secret or the key to thinking charitably is not just thinking cash, right? It's thinking, what value can I bring to the poor, to the church, even to my family? And then working along those lines, bringing as much value and as much help as you can.
Yeah, I think that reassessment helps. And especially if you think of everything that you have as being given to you by God, then you can give any of those things if you make an assessment and see how much value each of those things has. And then give. That's also charitable giving your service, giving your time. And I think that that's important to remember, because sometimes one might only think in percentages and might only think in the terms of cash and then feel like they don't have the means to contribute. But most people do, even without realizing it.
For sure.
So that does it for our charitable giving episode. I hope that our audience is already familiar with charitable giving and that they have some sort of practice in place. But if they don't, I hope this video helped understand a little better the place that charitable giving has in Catholic social teaching. And I hope it gives a roadmap that can be followed rather well. So that does it for this episode. I want to thank you all for watching. Paul Street Journal.